Hello, my dear alumni friends of SGPGI. I hope you are all well. Before I begin my talk, which will actually be a sort of a causerie, let me thank Preeti and Swasti for giving me this opportunity on behalf of the organizing committee of SGPGI on this alumni meet, annual alumni meet, which I think is going to be a prelude to this year's Foundation Day. I will tell you about the dearth of advocacy and collective policy voice in Indian science. Mr. Nehru, Jawaharlal Nehru, in 1937, after leading Indian National Congress to victory in the Indian provincial election, he said something about science. Let me read it. He said, this is what he said. He said, it is science alone that can solve the problems of hunger and poverty, of insanitation and illiteracy, of superstition and deadening custom and tradition, of vast resources running to waste, of a rich country inhabited by starving people. Now note his words. He said, science can solve the problem of hunger. Post-independence, thanks to the free press, famines never occurred, but India still is suffering from the scourge of malnutrition. In this regard, scientists have done their job, but political will had to see to it that Indian children are not wasted and stunted. To those who hold political power, to quote Bob Dylan's song, the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Now that was in 1937 when Nehru made that famous statement about the need of science. 21 years had passed by after Nehru's unwavering endorsement of scientific research, and 11 years after independence, India came up with its first science policy document, which is known as SPR 1958 because the document was made public in 1958, which is also known as Science Policy Resolution. This was scripted by Homi Jahangir Bhabha, and this policy attached utmost importance to research directed at reducing India's dependence on import and achieving self-sufficiency through indigenous industrialization. The emphasis on self-sufficiency mission in the first science policy document still resonates strongly in today's much popular phrase, Atmanirbhar Bharat. India has come a long way compared to all countries that got independence from colonial rule. Indeed, I think India, and not I think, I'm sure that India was the only country in the world that so quickly shined in R&D after securing freedom from the long duration shackles of colonialism. We take it for granted that India's contribution to chemistry, agricultural science and physics merely 2 decades after independence was among the top 10 countries in the world when the newly emerging nations were trying how to spell science. However, the first policy document, or SPR 1958, failed to note the recommendations of Professor Vannevar Bush, the MIT professor and the architect of the American science policy. If you have not, please read his document on the American science policy. It is known as Science, the Endless Frontier, which he submitted to President Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1945 when the Second World War in the European theater was ending. Bush convinced FDR, Roosevelt, to adopt this science policy, which actually for the first time told the US government to set up a contractual R&D format with the universities throughout the country. And actually this policy, which was subsequently accepted by the president, gave way to National Science Foundation, US's National Science Foundation, and he was its first director, Dr. Bush. Now, in the US, most of the universities are privately managed, and private agencies are always skeptical of government. Bush realized this, and so he first strongly discouraged building government R&D institutions. His mantra was that let the public money be spent to get the best research through peer-reviewed competitive funding model without government interference into the running of the universities. So the universities were pretty much relaxed. They had no problem in receiving the funding, and on the top of that they were also receiving generous overhead or the indirect cost, which was very much helping in the running of those universities. I distinctly remember that when I got my NIH grant, NIH had to pay 82% indirect cost, which is here it is called, in India it is called overhead, on the top of the amount I was getting. So it is that hefty, and that actually motivates the universities in getting federal funding. Now, with giving government funding or the public funding to universities for research also meant that the universities would impart first-hand training on scientific research and innovation to their students, that in turn will ensure generation of young, well-trained researchers for the country in large number, which actually they did. This is exactly where India erred, as the government took the theka of running R&D through the public funded institutes, and scientists like me filling those laboratories that eventually become islands. The reality is now, the real statistics is now having that these institutes, research institutes, have average strength of less than 50 scientists, and as a result these islands like situation produce postdocs for the US and serve to enhance the CV of scientists to secure some national awards or recognitions with too many alphabet F containing acronyms after their names, such as FASC, FNA, FNASC, FAMS, वगैरह वगैरह. Instead of the public investment on super specialty R&D institutions, the government right after independence should have invested in a large measure to establishing public schools for primary and secondary education. This would have served to provide quality education to a much larger percentage of children, regardless of their caste, religion, culture and economic differences. Educating children of varied backgrounds together imparts acceptance of diversity that then gets imprinted in their minds, because that is their impressionable age. Besides pedagogy, public schooling makes a true citizen of a country as diverse as India. I have been educated in public school throughout and knew my friends and teachers by their first name only. never became conscious of the dress and shoes my friends wore, tiffin they ate, and how they communicated. It never occurred to me that I should be conscious about it. Looking back, I see myself seamlessly growing up in a melting pot that represented the diversity of our country. I also experienced the effectiveness of Vannevar Bush's vision of giving competitive research funds to universities and colleges. As an undergraduate student of Presidency College, again a government funded college, where many during my time as a student used to do PhDs. And I was initiated to research along with my 12 other classmates in physiology honors by our head of the department, Dr. H.P. Chattopadhyay. We were his last batch of students as he superannuated after we passed out. By the way, I am not related to Dr. H.P. Chattopadhyay in the same way I am not related to Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay or Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay or Sarojini Naidu Ni Chattopadhyay. Instead of lecturing in the class, Dr. H.P. Chattopadhyay, or HPC, we used to call him by that acronym, he used to take us to his lab and discussed his research for which he was funded by ICMR. The same lab from where, as a PhD student, he published a paper in Science in 1951, which showed that fully germinated pulses and some commonly consumed cereals of India are nutritionally much superior to their undergerminated forms. Noting this paper, National Development Council of Government of India instructed the Ministry of Agriculture to take measures to ensure that pulses and cereals are always harvested after complete germination. Well, thanks to HPC's mode of teaching, 11 out of 13 in my class completed PhD and are still involved in active research. That is 84% undergraduates pursuing active R&D career. So just imagine if all Indian universities or colleges had the research lab like that of HPC, how many fold more natural science PhDs India had over the present count of 4 lakh. That is, I calculated, it comes to 0.03% of India's population. Now, after that SPR 1958, the first science policy document, 3 more documents have come. After 1958 was 1983, then in 2003, and then the most recent one is 2013. The last one, which was in 2013, is called Science, Technology and Innovation Policy, and it has a notable addition of the word innovation and aims at fueling a knowledge-based economy for the first time in the country. So this STIP or 2013 policy also for the first time promised increasing India's R&D budget from 0.7% of GDP to 2%, nearly tripling the budget allocation. Actually, if you remember, from 2008 for the next 4 years, then Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh used to make this announcement in every science congress. Well, researchers like me were delighted, but the real fruit is still awaited. So what did our science leaders think? Do they think that the increased allocation for R&D after the announcement by the Prime Minister or in the recent policy document will happen automatically in the next union budget? It doesn't happen like that. I remember back in 1997, I was doing my postdoc in Boston when Bill Clinton won the second term as the president, and announced his plan for 21st Century Research Fund in a speech at Caltech, Pasadena. Almost immediately, FASEB, a federation of scientific societies that include all American societies in biological and biomedical sciences, drew a roadmap for doubling NIH budget in the next 5 years. NSF and all other research funding agencies that used federal funding took similar action. Not only that, National Academy of Arts and Science brought out a special issue of PNAS where experts from all fields of science proposed how to enhance allocation in their respective discipline. As I was a member of the two societies that come under FASEB, I started getting regular emails from FASEB urging me to write emails to state congressional representatives and senators, in my case it was Massachusetts, to support the cause of enhanced research budget in an expedited manner. The email contained a prepared letter and email addresses to facilitate sending message to the senators and congressional representatives of the individual state. Thanks to such kind of advocacy, NIH received 20% budget hike in the next year in 1998, and that went up by the same rate every succeeding year to complete doubling in 2002. And I was a beneficiary as I got my first grant from NIH in 2002. By contrast, Indian science leaders have not shown any enthusiasm despite repeated announcements by Dr. Manmohan Singh. They remained in slumber even after STIP 2013 came out that announced the plan for tripling India's R&D allocation. And the sad reality now is that India's budget stands at less than 0.6% of GDP. What is even more alarming is that India's GDP declined considerably from 2016, and accordingly total R&D budget has shrunk. Recall, as recent as in 2017, Trump announced 20% R&D budget cut, but aggressive advocacy by the American science leaders eventually forced Congress allocate 2% higher budget over the previous year, let alone any cut. So let some school children tell Indian science leaders that politicians don't know any of the deep issues of R&D. It is not their job, it is not their training, and it is not their responsibility. Also, they are not thinking about any of these. Once they are elected to the office, they are running all the day to remain influential and impactful in politics to ensure re-election. There is no exception to it anywhere in the world, and I don't think there is anything wrong in it. It is the job description of the science leaders to script the growth of science in the country, and that cannot take place without enhanced public investment, period. Think about one situation. Per capita, the US has 15 times more PhDs than India in natural sciences alone, and yet it has only one academy called the American Academy of Arts and Sciences that encompasses every discipline of scholarship, natural science, including medicine, material science, energy, environment, everything, and then literature, arts, economics, humanities, justice, education, global affairs, everything. In India, in natural sciences alone, there are 6 academies, while we have, let me remind you, we have 15 times less PhD per capita, less PhD than US in natural science alone. Okay? But in India, in natural science, there are 6 academies, 3 science academies and one each in medical science, engineering and agriculture, which is actually a clear sign of lack of collective voice. Besides, far below par R&D funding compared to not only US but also many Asian countries, which India is having. The quality of funding in India is very poor. Funds come late and with too many bureaucratic hassles. Except ISRO, all agencies face terrible bureaucratic persecution as if investigators by default are crooks. We take pride in ISRO's performance, but let us acknowledge that a very favorable bureaucracy has contributed to its excellence. In his Science Congress speech in Bangalore in 2020, the Prime Minister said, "We are continuing our efforts to ensure ease of doing science and effectively using information technologies to reduce red tape." Indian science leaders frequently go to PM's darbar with bowed heads and folded hands, seeking emolument of office or badges of honor, which only reveal their pettiness to our political leaders. Instead, would they approach PMO anytime soon with a blueprint for easing mindless bureaucracy that almost afflicts the daily life of researchers so that allocated funds are not returned? Let us tell our science leaders unambiguously that what they do is actually called mere managing of institutes and universities. It is not how academic centers are led. It is not leadership, it is a management. They are managing the status quo and are under the wrong impression that they are leading. By doing what they are doing, they are effectively regressing countries' R&D effort. Instead, they should become advocates, speaking exclusively on behalf of countries' researchers and set priorities on the policy that would make ease of doing science a reality. Thank you very much, my friend. Bye.